So, Jesus, is he God? Is he man? What does that even mean? I'm Aiden, and welcome to A Pastor's Life for Me. So there's a theological term known as the Hypostatic Union. So I thought this would be fun to look up in a normal dictionary, so I did, and it says, the combination of divine and human natures in the single person of Christ. Not bad. Not bad at all for a secular dictionary. That is basically the definition, but on the other hand, it's somewhat lacking. To what degree was Jesus human? To what degree was he God? How much of his nature was human nature and how much of his nature was a God nature? This definition states that Jesus is both man and God, but it doesn't really dive into it, which leaves the door open for heresy. Here's an example. Arianism. But why don't we go back to our trusty dictionary for this one? Arianism, the main heresy denying the divinity of Christ, originating with Alexandrian priest Arius, circa 250 to 336 AD. Arianism maintained that the Son of God was created by the Father and was therefore neither co-eternal nor consubstantial with the Father. Oh, and if you didn't know, there is a modern name to this. It's called Mormonism. Basically, it's the claim that Jesus isn't fully God. In Arianism, that can go as to saying he's not God at all, or at other times, it can mean that he's not equal with God the Father. It is the claim that Jesus is part God, but since he's created, he's not fully God. So then there's a ratio to this, say something like an 80-20 split. Why am I even talking about this when I can show you what I mean? So I've got a glass here named Jesus. I have the red liquid glass being humanity, the green liquid glass being deity. So to get Arianism, I take this glass and I pour pretty much all of it into it. And I take this glass and just sprinkle in a little bit. 99% humanity, just a tad bit of deity. You know, because Jesus really isn't God. Heresy. Or we could go with some of the more modern beliefs and say, well, Jesus is mostly human with maybe 20% deity. Does change the effect, but we're not really getting close at all now, are we? Well, I'll say, well, let's pour some of the humanity back and add more deity. Give us more of a 50-50 split, you know? 50% equals 100%. Problem solved, right? But again, heresy. The issue is we're using natural math to try and define this, but that isn't really Christian math. The Trinity. God is 3 and 1. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, each individual persons of the Trinity, but one in essence. 3 persons, 1 God. 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3, right? With eggs, yes. With God, no. It's because 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 1. Now this is kind of a joke, but it does give us a proper perspective. Jesus is one person, but he has 2 natures, his divine one and his human one. We then try and put some ratio on that and say, well, he's 99% man with, a sprinkled 1% of God, or an 80-20, or even going down to he's half God, half man. That is proper math, but this isn't an equation. Jesus is 100% God and 100% man. This, of course, doesn't make sense to us, so then we take 2 glasses of 100% and try and dump it into 1 glass as another 100%, and it just flows over and makes a mess. But like I said, the hypostatic union is not a math equation. So let me define it for you. Jesus is 100% God in the flesh. Jesus is also 100% man in the flesh. Both the fullness of God dwells in him and the fullness of man. Jesus also has two natures, his divine nature and his human nature, which isn't to be confused with a sin nature. His divine nature is evident in the fact that he's perfect and sinless, as well as the authority he displays while he was on the earth. His human nature is evident in the fact that he gets hungry, he sleeps, he needs to eat, feels pain, and even fear. Jesus was not created, but exists eternally as one of the persons of the Godhead. That was a mouthful, but that is why now we are going to go into some depth into this. Jesus is 100% God. In John 10:30, Jesus said, "The Father and I are one." You can't be part God if you are fully one. Colossians 1:19 tells us that in him the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Colossians 2:9 says, "In him the whole fullness of deity dwelled bodily." And these are only 3 passages which speak of Jesus being fully God. That also helps that he claimed to be God and that he forgave sins and did things that only God can do. Jesus is 100% man. In him the whole fullness of deity dwelled bodily. As well as John 1:14, which speaks of the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us. So Christ had a human body, but that doesn't specifically say that he was 100% human. Hebrews 2:17 is extremely important to this argument because it states that he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. In order to be like his brothers, speaking of the Jews, in every respect, Jesus would have had to have been fully human. He could not be compared to them with the sufferings that are common to man, or have gone through the effects of life that humans go through if he wasn't 100% man. Jesus had a divine nature. 1 Corinthians 5:21, 1 Peter 2:22, 1 John 3:5, and Hebrews 4:15 all tell us that Jesus was sinless. This only coming through having a divine nature. Jesus also showed this through his authority. He did many miracles in his own power, whereas others did it with the power of God. Since Jesus is God, he has the authority to do it himself. Jesus had a human nature. God is unable to be tempted, but while Jesus was here on earth, he was tempted. We read about this in Matthew chapter 4 when Satan tempts him in the wilderness. Though he never gave in to sin, he was tempted as all humans are. He also feared suffering on the cross, which we see while he was in Gethsemane. These are things that come through in a human nature. And finally, Jesus exists eternally as one of the persons in the Godhead. He was not created, but is the creator. John speaks of this when he says all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Hebrews 2:10 also speaks about this. So Jesus is 100% God, 100% man. He has a divine nature and a human nature, and he exists eternally. And then I guess the whole big question behind all of this is why? The answer is substitutionary atonement. I know, another big theological mouthful. We'll get into that in one of these videos, but basically it breaks down as this. The purpose of the hypostatic union is for our salvation. We are fallen and have no way of saving ourselves. So it took the perfection of God to make us perfect, and the blood through the penalty of man to save us. Jesus is the only one who could do this. He is 100% God. His sinless life, his perfection, his righteousness is imputed onto us. We are credited it. Jesus had to be 100% man in order to die for the sins of men. And that is why this doctrine is so important, because without it, we're not saved. But on that note, subscribe to our channel, and I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a like. I'd appreciate that. As well, I hope that you are all doing well during this time with the coronavirus. I know it's affecting you all in some way or form, and it's easier for some and more difficult for others, but know that we can trust God through this situation. But that is all that we have for today, so until next time, remember to know the word, do the word, and share the word, but as always, we do it in love.